There's been a lot of talk recently about AI and search and SEO. And the question basically comes down to with all of this talk about AI search, so AIEO, GEO, so generative engine optimization, all of these new acronyms, does old fashioned search engine optimization still matter in this day and age? And the answer is yes. No, maybe. It's complicated. So we're gonna dive into it. With all of the stuff that's happening right now with large language models, there's been a lot of question about whether or not search engine optimization is still relevant, whether or not it's good enough, whether or not people should be focusing on AI engine optimization, so AEO, or generative engine optimization, GEO, or whatever number of acronyms. And for context, Google is addressing this directly. Two things happened very recently. Here we have Google's official release of their white paper optimizing your web for generative AI features on Google search, where Google is addressing directly in this article, like, is SEO still relevant? And their short take on it is yes, best practices, SEO is still relevant. At the same time, there's also been a lot of talk because recently Google just had their annual Google Marketing Live event, and there was a lot of interesting things that they revealed, including how ads are going to be embedded directly into AI results. So there's a lot of things that are happening around the models, around how they're responding to people. And the question keeps coming back. Well, with all of this excitement, with all of these things that are happening on the AI side, search engine optimization is still relevant for today. And that's where it gets complicated. So first of all, let's look at what search engine optimization was, call it, before all of the AI stuff in the last few months, in the last 18 months or so. Up until very, very recently, SEO basically meant Google. Yes, there was like some small slices here and there with Ask Jeeves that no longer exists. Some people are still on Bing because, quite frankly, they probably just never changed their default settings. And then you have basically everybody else when it comes to search. When it comes to search, Google has had or maybe still has a monopoly on it. So SEO and Google, they're basically the same thing. If you're optimizing for search, you're optimizing for Google. The fundamentals of search engine optimization are basically making sure that Google is able to crawl your site, is able to see all the content, it's able to categorize it properly, and it's basically able to catalog it in a way that is accurate so that when somebody is searching for something that you're speaking to, that you're going to come up, right? Super straightforward. The thing that's less obvious to people is that Google has been using AI for this for over a decade at this point. So if you think about modern day AI search and how it works, the thing that's changed is not the back end. This is the thing that people miss. When it comes to at least the responses that you get on Gemini, the difference is that you're no longer interacting with the search bar the way that you used to. Instead, you're opening up Gemini, you're having a conversation with it, but it's pulling from the same source, right? All of the information that Google has been cataloging for since the beginning of the creation of Google, the algorithms that do the crawling, the bots that go out, that look at your site, that understand the context, that are tearing apart your interface to get at the actual content, that's been using AI for over a decade. So in terms of the actual information that's happening in the back end, that's pretty much the same. So if you were optimizing for SEO 5 years ago, there's nothing to change on that side in theory, because the way in which Google is indexing and cataloging your site is still the same. The thing that's changed is on the front end, how Google is responding to the user because the technology has changed. So you're no longer seeing a whole list of websites based on a search query. You're now having, in theory, a more in-depth conversation with an AI, and that large language model is deciding what to pull out. So even though it's pulling from the same data source, the way in which it's pulling stuff out could be slightly different. But because it's still Google, I would imagine that the philosophy of why it decides to show certain things is going to be largely the same. Yes, the AI is going to be more nuanced in what it shows you, and it's going to show fewer things. So it's much, much more important to be at the top. But fundamentally, I think the basics of what you can do as a business owner in terms of SEO are going to be the same. Good SEO is good SEO. Getting found by Google is getting found by Google. the response method is going to be different. The same way, if Gemini only responds with 3 or 4 sources, the reality is that even in SEO, most people don't scroll past the first 3 or 4 sources anyways. So if you were winning at SEO, there's a good chance that you're still winning at AI in terms of Google Gemini. The difference is if your content is geared towards a specific nuance, and whether or not that nuance is now entering the conversation when people are chatting with the AI, whereas before maybe that nuance point was not involved when they were doing a straight up search, that's definitely going to have an impact on whether or not you show up. So that's what's going on with the Google side. Now, we need to zoom out. This is the second part of it, and why I say SEO in the old way may not matter in the same way. Um, if we look at the pre-LLM days, before ChatGPT made such a big splash, everybody was turning to Google to look stuff up. Fast forward to 2026, and if you imagine all of the people online who are asking a question, and you imagine that as a market, as a giant pie, whereas Google used to take up 98% of that pie, there's a question now of how much ChatGPT and Claude and all these other LLMs, how much of that pie they've eaten up. There's now more and more people that when they have a question pop into their head, they are not turning to Google as their first source. They might be turning to ChatGPT. They might be going to something else. They might be going to Claude. So then the question becomes, not what is Google doing for SEO, or not what is Google doing to get its answers, but what is Anthropic? What is OpenAI? What are they doing to get their answers? How are they scraping your sites? And are they looking at the same signals as traditional SEO? So are they looking for the same things that Google looks for? When you're thinking of GEO or AIEO or whatever acronym, I think that's the thing that people are trying to crack. How do you get found not necessarily on Google, but how do you get found on these new LLMs that may or may not search things differently? So when it comes to the question of is SEO still relevant, I think it is, only because I don't think that anything that these new models is doing is anything that is that fundamentally different. I think the one thing that we've seen, and we've seen this by kind of reverse engineering some of the results that people are seeing. One of my buddies has done some really interesting work on reverse engineering how the AIs get their answers. And what he's been able to see is that some of the sources that are weighted by these other LLMs is slightly different from the way that Gemini weights it. But the other side of that coin is that as we've seen, for example, ChatGPT and Claude rely more and more on things like conversations happening on forums, conversations happening on Reddit, for example, or looking at your Google reviews, looking at your Facebook reviews, and taking that into consideration. Gemini is also starting to do that sort of thing. So it's kind of like an arms race, but ultimately, I don't think there's any fundamentally different about the way in which Anthropic or OpenAI is crawling the web to kind of pull in context and figure out what to display, versus anything that's fundamentally different from what Google is doing, or what Google used to do back in the day, or is still doing rather. So ultimately, does SEO still matter? I think so. Does it matter in the same way? I'm not sure. And this is where it's a maybe. In the past, I think that there was a lot less reliance on what the community at large was kind of saying about your brand. Today, I think it matters a lot more. One of the things that we've noticed is that being listed on earned media, so owned media is something like your own website, you control it. Earned media is something that you don't control, that you're listed on. So people are talking about you. If you're doing a PR strategy, if you have like a news article about your company, earned media is having even more of an impact now than it did before. Things like reviews are having much more of an impact in terms of what these systems recommend or don't recommend. And from what we've seen, having a very wide footprint across a lot of different websites and media is more valuable than having very deep knowledge on your own website. So is that considered traditional SEO? I don't know. This is probably part of some people's strategy and not part of others. But in terms of the broader question of is SEO still relevant in the LLM age, I think it is. The fundamentals are still the same. If your website is not crawlable by Google, it's probably not crawlable by OpenAI or Anthropic, and it's going to be a problem. So if you adhere to a AI first mentality when it comes to search, a good starting point is at least making sure that your baseline SEO is solid. Thanks for watching. Please take a minute to like and subscribe. It really helps us out. We really appreciate it. If you need help with any of your marketing stuff, check us out at drivemarketing.ca and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have.